Hey, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions and organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening and you want to see all of our faces, there are 8 of us in studio today. Please head over to YouTube at Cults to Consciousness. We cannot wait to see your comments on this video. We have some incredible women with us today, so let me back up. We are celebrating our 200th episode. It is crazy to me that I have done so many interviews. Jonathan's even done a couple. That's not even including the lives. And we went to our audience, you guys, and we're like, hey, do you have any ideas? What would you like to see for our celebratory episode? And many of you said, do a panel with previous guests and talk about their experiences, how they are now. So we have brought together some powerhouse women. Guys, if I gave you the bio of every single person in this chat, it would take the whole episode. So I'm just going to give you their name, give you the cult that they came from, that they are speaking from with their experiences. I'm going to list all of their information in the description. You can go find all of their previous episodes. Every single person here has done an interview with me, a deep dive into their story, sometimes multiple episodes. So definitely go check that out after the fact. Okay, in no particular order, here we go. Daniela Mesnick-Young from Children of God. We have Jasper Hoffman, who is from the Mennonite group. We have Tia Levings, representing extreme Christian fundamentalism and patriarchy as a whole. We have Jasmin.faulk Dickerson, who grew up in Saudi Arabia and is representing extreme fundamentalist Islam. We have Sarah Edmondson from Nexium, the self-help group. We have Beatrice Weber from Hasidic Judaism, and Amanda Ray Grant from Polygamous Mormonism. So, stacked group. I'm so excited to have you all here. This is going to be amazing. Today's conversation is focusing on how women are mostly affected within the group. I will be speaking in binary terms simply because that is the experience of our guests here today, not to discount any other experiences, and also the binary black and white thinking of these cults, these specific gender roles and misogyny that go on in it. So, welcome everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yes.
Great to be here.
Yes, that was like the longest, craziest intro I think I've ever done. It is great. So let's start with this first prompt. Now, this may apply to all of you, all these prompts that I have written down. We may get to all of them, we may not. I have 6 here, and then of course we're going to end with some Linda Listen moments. So some of these may apply to you, some of them may not. Just speak whenever you feel called, and I cannot wait to see where this conversation goes. First prompt, how did your cult use fear, specifically for women, to keep you small, passive, and obedient? Who wants to kick us off?
Oh my gosh.
I'll kick us off since I'm running with
Go. Go.
Okay. So one of the ways that the Amish and Mennonite and Anabaptist churches utilize fear in controlling women is through actual facilities that are unlicensed and unregulated. There's over 70 of these within the United States that are currently operating. I speak out a lot about these, but these are a huge component in how they will actually ship you off if you are a female and speaking out to these facilities where they will drug you, they will lock you away, they will do labor trafficking, sex trafficking. So that's a huge piece of my cult.
Yeah, I want to speak up for evangelical patriarchy, which is so mainstream in America. Because I think punishment and the strict discipline and the baby spanking and all of that really takes like the stage when we're talking about fear. But it really starts way back in early childhood. When you grow up in these churches, you are actually scared more with the fear of displeasing God. And so there's like this verse in the Bible that says, this is my beloved son in who I am well pleased. And you are taught from earliest age that if you do not please God, if you do not please your parents, you are in trouble, you will burn in hell, you will lose your relationships, you will lose your origin attachments. And so it's fear as control all the way through. And the external behaviors that we talk about when we're exposing cults, those are just the physical manifestations of what's already been instilled.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in here just because I think it surprises people when, oftentimes when I say this, specifically religions who, tend to have a representation of a seasoned cult is what I always say when I'm asked always what's the difference between a cult and a religion is a religion has just had time to season it started as a cult. And so Judaism, Islam, and Christianity are unbelievably alike in a lot of these tactics and a lot of the ways that they do it. And I want to echo what was just said as far as that fear of God. It's interesting because there aren't many physical tactics that I can think of that are really prominent in society. It's mostly just that ingrained belief. And so it's such an ingrained sense of self in how you respond. And that fear is, I think it's not even viewed as fear. It's viewed as reverence and as something really powerful and something to be proud of. So the fear is really turns into fear when you're aware that something's off. But prior to being aware something's off, it's not fear. It's actually reverence and pride.
The way I grew up in Hasidic Judaism was a little bit different. Of course, there was the fear of God. God sees everything you do, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing. There's always somebody seeing you. And I remember as a kid visualizing it. But what we were also taught was if somebody would get sick or something physical would happen, it was blamed on like our actions and mostly on women's modesty, right? So when COVID first started, there were signs all over, the women's skirts are too short, their wigs, which Orthodox women wear, are too long. So there's really that direct correlation. And like so many of us, when we leave the community, we're like terrified, like we're going to get into a car crash or like God is going to punish us now. Not that we didn't have the concept of hell in like the larger Jewish world, they don't, but like the way we grew up, yes, hell. But what was much more scary is that like somebody could literally get cancer tomorrow because today my skirt was not 4 inches below my knees.
Yeah.
I definitely, to kind of piggyback off on that one, a lot of we had a lot of the same beliefs, and so when you leave like a polygamous cult that I came from, a lot of us would leave, and then if an accident happened, like let's say you get in a car accident, you're like, oh, was it because some irrational thing that we were brought up to believe, like maybe because I didn't maybe because I decided to wear spaghetti straps today, or because I said the F word today, now God is punishing me by, getting me in this accident. But I want to focus too a little bit on specifically the women's roles. Like you mentioned, the modesty thing is like, it's the woman's responsibility to make sure that the men's eyes aren't wandering, right? It's such a heavy responsibility that all these women have. And specifically in my polygamous group, it's just a known norm that when we're born into this group, men are going to be having more opportunities than us, and we will have to just be okay with that. And if you question it, it is a sin, right? And so, for example, celestial marriage is what we grew up in, and so that means men get multiple wives, and don't you dare even think about having multiple husbands, and you will have one partner, and that is how you bring your family to salvation, right? So instantly from a young age, there is this huge pressure to bring your family to heaven and not commit sexual sin. So I think you, Jasmine, had a really good point. Like it's fear, but it's also like
Obedience.
Right. There's other words. Yeah, there's words that they use that make you think you're not in fear your whole life, but it is a form of brainwashing and control.
Just to jump in as someone wasn't in a religion, NXIVM was personal growth, but I've only recently realized since doing our podcast that really it was a religion. It's just Keith, our leader, was God versus the God that you all had in your various religions. But there's always the fear of, if you really bought in from the beginning, and again, I wasn't born into it, but if I committed to my growth with this path, just like you all, there was a path, the way, the only way. This was the way for my, not salvation, but my success and my happiness and my joy and my everything. This was the only way to get there. So if I left, there was the fear of I wouldn't have any of those things if I did truly believe it was the only way. But I think when I hear you guys speak is that there's this, there's the fear of I'm not going to either be, whether you call it heaven or hell, whatever, you're not going to be in the group. There's an acceptance, right?
Belonging,
So if I screw up in some way, I'm somehow not okay. I'm not worthy. I'm not accepted. I'm not going to be able to like survive in this thing that I've said is the thing that I'm going to be doing. So that's how it was in NXIVM. And ironically, we even learned that fear is used to control in many of the modules. But so it sort of like went under the radar, and it was more tacit. It wasn't so overt as I think it was in most religions.
Fear was used as in it was a good thing, and you were conscious of your fear being helpful for you?
Well, fear was defined as a lack of data. Like if you're afraid of something happening, as soon as you have the data, you're okay. So if you were experiencing fear, that was also something that we were generating ourselves. So you couldn't, it was never, I never thought that somebody else was causing me fear. I felt afraid because of my own issues, or they called it disintegrations. But there was a instilled fear because of the way it was tacitly expressed, like, oh, so-and-so left the community. I guess they hit up against their issue and they're never going to blah, 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 blah. So I believed that if I left, I wouldn't be able to work through the things I was there to work through, because I also believed it was the only place to get there.
You know, Christianity has a parallel to that, because they'll say, God did not give you a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind. And so if you're afraid, you're taught, well, it's not from God. It's not our problem. We're not the ones scaring you. Again, it's all in the mind.
So it's like they gaslight.
That's what I was going to say, is it's sin. Like fear in our churches is correlated to sin. And so if you have anxiety, depression, any sort of that, it's a spiritual issue. So it causes this carrot being held in front of you that if you're experiencing these things and you feel like Satan has taken a hold of your family and yourself. And so you're then caught in this inner turmoil where you can't win, right? Because it's the hamster on the wheel of you're feeling anxiety, you're feeling fear. So you're constantly trying to get out of that, which is then causing more spiritual issues, and it just can deteriorate your mental health so much.
And this is part of a larger cult tactic too, of blaming individuals for systemic problems, right? Essentially, every cult tells you that like everything bad is your fault and everything good is on them or on their group or their way. And since I'm from Children of God, the child sex cult, I'll bring up one I didn't hear anyone talk about, which is pregnancy. My cult used pregnancy to keep women in fear and to keep women there. And it was both, you have a lot of kids, and then what are you going to do if you leave? But also, you have a lot of kids, are you going to get to leave with them? And so my grandmother had this happen to her. And when she told her husband that she wanted to leave, she just, her eldest daughter was just disappeared the next day, and she didn't see her again for like 25 years or something. And so in both of these very real ways, and this is actually part of what got me to leave at the age of 15, because at the age of 16, I was to be considered an adult woman. And almost everyone I know had had a child before the age of 19. And so I was like, I need to leave now before I have one more thing to deal with. But of course, this is not the way they approach it, right? So we had this thing called going for the gold. And you were supposed to be trying to get the gold medals of having tons of children for like God's army, right? So it was very much pushing the have a bunch of children narratives. But at the and very, very young, of course. And at the same time, this is just tying you more and more to the cult.
Yeah, I just got chills.
Yeah. So, I mean, I come from a community where for many years I called it arranged marriages. It's not arranged, it's forced marriages. You're set up and you need to marry the person you're set up with. And then you have children right away. Generally, it's at 18. For the vast majority, there are some small groups that do before 18, but mostly it's 18, so it's legal age. But then, you're not taught about birth control, consent. There's none of that. It's like get married, consummate your marriage, get pregnant, right? So I got pregnant a month later, had a baby when I was 19. By the time I was 21, I had 3 kids. And they hold that, like if you want to leave the community, like they will make sure you don't leave with your kids. I managed to leave with my 4 youngest, but was in family court for 10 years fighting for them because the community backs the person who stays in the community. So many people stay, even if they don't believe, just because they're so afraid of losing their children.
So it's not just fear, it's fear and dependency.
I just wanted to say there's this other part of it that I see a lot, which is when people realize the cult is not for them, they think they're the problem, right? Because that's what we've been told. Everything's our problem. And so instead of leaving, they'll stay for the children. And that's
Mhm.
another way I think that these groups like use your children to weaponize against you, because it's like, oh, what if I'm wrong and I leave and then, I've taken my kids away from the fountain of everything.
What I've seen is people leave and won't fight for their children. Will be like, okay, I had to leave for my own well-being, but like for my children, it's better to stay there. I've seen that as well.
Well, I'd like to add here, this is really interesting, the children as a tactic for sure. In the fundamentalist Islamic interpretation, which is, I think, Islamic interpretation, because I think everyone sort of follows this particular rule and law. If a mother decides to leave, if the father decides to leave, it doesn't matter. If there's a separation there, the children automatically are given to the father. If it's a boy, he is given the choice at age 7 to decide, do you want to live with your dad or do you want to live with your mom? But the daughter, the girl, automatically goes to her dad at age 6 or 7. So again, that's not only imposed upon the mother, but also the daughter doesn't get a choice while the boy does get a choice. So I just wanted to add that in context as well.
So in our churches, it's very, very common for children to be removed out of the home. It's actually more abnormal for a family to maintain its actual unit the entire time. So everybody knows the church will extract your children without any legal paperwork, without anything. They will ship them off across state lines to another family. They'll put them in a kid's ranch, a boys' ranch or a girls' farm. And so you're taught from as soon as you have children that if you don't have your finances in order, really kind of like backing up exactly like being extremely spiritual and staying within church guidelines, they will remove your children even if you still are within church guidelines. But so that really is a component. And I'm curious if anybody else experiences that, because that is so common within our church, which is why then nobody reports child abuse, because you're already afraid that some sort of leadership is going to take your children because that's so common. So then you're taught and reinforced that law enforcement will do that. So I'm curious if anybody else has experienced that in their cult.
I experienced a similarity of they really taught us not to trust law enforcement, and you never call on the law because the law will take your family away, kind of bridging this in a way, really protecting the abusers, but making us fear losing our family by telling the worldly people what we're really doing, right? It was a very
Right.
manipulated way of just protecting the ones that don't want to be held accountable. But then it creates this, now when I was trying to leave, I didn't know if I should call the police because maybe the police aren't going to help me, because I had this idea that they put in there that I wasn't going to be able to rely on any of that.
So this is something that I wanted to bring up actually, because this leads right into information control. So what are the ways that your cult used information control to keep you isolated and unaware of the outside world? Or ways that they used information control to make you not believe information that you were being presented from the outside world?
I want to bite on that because it bridges in quiverful evangelical patriarchy, which many people are familiar with the Duggar family and the big homeschooling families, and I guess my book now. But we had the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, which is like directly involved with the cabinet of our current new administration and Project 2025. I mean, they convinced us that if we strayed, that the police were going to show up at our door and steal our children, take them away because we were homeschooling. We ran drills with our children in case the police came knocking. The information control was so pervasive with the fear. I have this series of people who are familiar with my social media know that these are the ordinary parenting practices that they told us that we could skip in order to have more children and have big families. And there are things like the pediatrician and any kind of advocacy, any kind of exposure you might have to an external information source, science, evidence, testimony, doctor, teacher, neighbor, extended family gatherings, any point of contact you might have with the outside. So we were honing this, America within an America, living in plain sight and hiding how we were really living. But it's so unilateral. It's like an invisible wall. There's no external information that gets in. So when they come after social media, they want to shut down the apps. They want to shut down internet access. They want to put your full ID in for accessing certain websites. All of that is just an expansion of what they already practice in their homes. And it's not possible to separate fear or information control or taking your children away. Like it's all so intertwined that you lose all of it when you leave. It's every single piece of you will be confronted, which is terrifying. It's just terrifying. Like really related to what I think it was what Beatrice said about you're terrified that something's going to go wrong tomorrow because there's no part of you that's been untouched.
Yeah, Danielle, I'd really like to get your opinion on this because you were in a literal compound, kind of blocked out from the world. Of course, you went over the walls every now and then to do your singing and try and get money from strangers, but the information control was so intense that you could only read cult material. So let's talk about that experience.
Yeah. So, I mean, we were one of these like completely separatist cults where you lived on a compound and, like you said, we didn't have any interaction with the outside world that wasn't controlled. And, I always like to throw this in here that cults aren't really cults, they're criminal enterprises because they're about getting your labor. And ours was the entertainment cult. So we would be out in the world, but we are performing. And I think this goes pretty deep actually with cults always having you performing, as Tia said, when you're at the outside world. It's like this living in plain sight thing, right? So when we're in the outside world, we're just nice little missionary kids. And then we go back to our compound and we didn't eat processed foods and we didn't have any sort of television. The first time I saw live television was on 9/11 when I was 14. We didn't read any books from the outside. We didn't have any sort of media at all. The only thing we had was movies. And those had to be like, very, very approved by the group. But it is, it's so true what Tia said, where like everything is connected. And I just found the quote by Margaret Singer where she says, leaving cults feels like death. Because it feels like, we're losing everything in our lives. And then the fear, I think there's this sad part of being the cult baby where it's like, then you get to the outside world and you don't fit because you grew up in this world of complete information control and homeschooling. And you're like, I think all of us children that grew up with the theory of you're in the world, but not of the world, even after we leave, there's always this fear of like, we're not going to fit in. And then we don't.
A complete loss because now I didn't fit in there, so I lost my family. I lost everything I've ever known. Come out here, and I don't fit in out here either. It's a whole different world. So you feel so isolated now because both worlds don't feel like home. Nowhere feels like home.
I'd like to add here. It's interesting because I think I'm the only one that's probably grown up in a different country. I believe. I think maybe. Oh, okay. Oh, yes. Okay. All right. We have some hands. So because I grew up in another country, also a part of the world where, again, this is a religion as opposed to, being labeled a cult. This was the norm. This was the law. This was everybody, subscribed to it and abided to it. So it was a little different in terms of creating this like separation between society and your kind of secret practice. This was everybody's practice. When you went out, in order to be part of society, you had to subscribe to all of this. And because it's a religion, I have to be very clear also on the fact, because I know the comments are coming. Every country has interpreted the religion or has applied the religion in a different way. Islam is a very huge religion. There are billions of people that follow it. And I'm not here to say that it's all bad. I personally, it's not a fit for me, but there are some who practice it a little more casually or a little more mildly, a little more attainably. But fundamentally, and this is what I'm here to speak to, in the fundamentalist or extremist way, in the radical way, it is extremely closed and extremely isolated from the rest of the world, but in an odd way, it's isolated in a communal way. I don't know if it makes sense what I'm trying to say here, but there wasn't this huge kind of like the secret within a secret. It was like, of course, we're all in this together.
Jasmine, do you get not all Muslims the way I get not all Christians?
Of course, all the time. Absolutely. Absolutely. And to some extent, I will say that I don't necessarily disagree with that. What I do get frustrated about is, okay, granted, we've agreed. Like I am literally repeating and reiterating multiple times ad nauseum that this is my experience at a time and place when this was very much the norm. And to pretend like it didn't happen because things are changing now or because not everyone is like that is so disingenuous and such a disservice to the many victims who continue to suffer either
right.
from a trauma from the past or from a trauma that's current.
Exactly.
Well, and I wanted to say that I think it's so important voices like Jasmine and Tia's that were like, we were from the mainstream thing, and yet this is how extreme it was. Because then my story's on the other side, right? Children of God, child sex cult, communes, right? It's considered so extreme, but I will read your stories and have all of these parallels. And I think a lot of what America's missing is the everyday extremism that goes on.
That's a good book title. Somebody should write that.
The biggest challenge that I run into, especially, I don't call myself an advocate at all. I'm an informant and just informing people. The challenge I run into is the romanticism in the United States of the Amish and Mennonites. It's very similar to Tia's with conservative fundamentalism. Nobody is buying the sex cult's butter, right? Nobody's buying your furniture and being like, oh my God, I got this at the compound and look at it. And I'm going to, pay extra dollars for it. There's not a lot of tourism around a lot of these cults like there is within the Amish and Mennonite communities. And so dismantling that, because even if you talk about the Islamic culture, especially so I'm in the Midwest and live in the South. So if you bring that up, there's a lot of, it's very polarizing, right? And so it's not as accepted as some of these other cults that we see that look pretty on the outside, but are so incredibly corrupt on the inside. So it's the same thing, the experience, like you mentioned. Yeah, go ahead.
I have to jump in here because there is the romanticizing on the left right now of like the whole protecting Islamophobia crap. It absolutely drives me crazy because I am, you got me all heated now. I am all for not attacking people because of their religion. 100%. I absolutely believe that everybody should be free to practice. I am a true liberal in that sense. But I do find it really aggravating when all of a sudden a so-called ideology who believes that, freedom of right, freedom of expression, freedom of existing, and basic human rights, which by the way are women's rights, all of a sudden that's not necessarily taken into consideration when you are protecting a religion or defending a religion or accusing people who want to call out the flaws of so-called religions. It's so contradicting. It just absolutely blows my mind. And so the people who are constantly attacking or accusing people being Islamophobic have no idea what they're even talking about because they're all of a sudden screaming on one screaming on one side queer rights, and at the same time absolutely having no clue that they're also defending a religion that is extremely misogynistic or has misogynistic practices and is putting women in a subservient situation. So you got me really going now.
I just have to ask, Jasmine, have you connected with Yasmin Mohammed?
This is so interesting you asked me because just today I got an invitation to be on her podcast. So
Oh,
hopefully
good,
we will
good.
be chatting
I was going
together.
to connect you
She's
because she's
Oh,
amazing.
She is.
We just recorded with her on a live actually 2 days ago.
Oh, that's awesome.
She's incredible and so legitimately brave.
There's so much I could reiterate and just say how it's a little bit different in the Hasidic community. And when you're talking about this, so in December, there's a big event hosted by some of the largest Hasidic groups. So you have tens of thousands of only men because women are not allowed in because the segregation between men and women in the Hasidic community is extreme. If, when you talk about the way they have services, the women are in a different room with a small window. The politicians all show up there. They all show up there. And it drives me crazy. Like, is anybody asking, where are the women? These women can't drive. In this particular steps, the women are forced to shave their heads. They are not allowed to participate in these communal and group events. It's just and then you have these most liberal and progressive politicians sitting there. And, I'll just talk about the information control. First of all, we're raised with a different language, and many children never are taught how to read and write in English. So they don't homeschool in the Hasidic community, but they have special schools, private schools, where the education is extremely, extremely limited. And that's one, advocacy thing I was involved with. So you'll have adult, mostly men, women speak English a little better, but that can't even speak the language. So they can't even pick up a newspaper. We were also, there's no TV ever, only news that was kind of filtered into the community, mostly in Yiddish, but even in English, it was really propaganda now, the way I see it. So it's really so frustrating and mind-boggling when you see, progressive leaders that are also very similar. There's this weird connection that's been around for a while between the nationalist Christians and the Hasidic community, where you have the Heritage Foundation writing papers in support of yeshiva education, which is like bizarre. Like, where are we? Where are we? But that is
We're
where we are.
achieving the same goal. The same goal
Exactly.
is oppressing women, period. Like,
Oppressing women,
I'm getting kicked
information
in my
control.
third right now, realizing how global this is. Like, this group represents how across the board this is. It's something.
Yeah. So I wanted to hear from Sarah too about the information control,
Sure.
because you were very much injected into mainstream society. You weren't in a compound. You had access to everything. And I know this because I didn't say it earlier. I came from mainstream Mormonism, for those who aren't familiar. So I was also very much in regular society in Utah, where everyone was Mormon, but I had access to things. And even so, when something was presented to me that was contradictory to what I had been told and indoctrinated with, I would defend. I would say that's not true. I would push back so hard. And so I know, Sarah, you encountered something similar about the leader when you would hear information about him. What were some of the tactics that NXIVM used to get you to not only disbelieve the information being presented, but get you to fiercely defend it?
Yeah, I was actually thinking when Daniela was talking, if she was in the compound on the spectrum, I'm on the far other end. I was away from the mothership. I lived in Vancouver. The headquarters were in Albany, New York, across the continent. And yeah, I could access anything. But Keith and the leadership were very smart at protecting themselves in two ways. One, we were taught that he was, it's so funny to say now, but teaching ethics and teaching, pushing up against the world. And this part I still believe to be true. There are unethical people in the world, right? There's people doing bad shit in the world. And Keith was trying to expose that. So anytime there was anything negative said or written about him, it was just more proof that people were trying to take him down. It was just a smear campaign. And so that was one thing that really
Sounds
sort
like
of,
politics.
yeah,
Sorry.
totally. But
Persecution.
that stayed that way for a long time. And the other thing they did, and there's a whole class about this, and again, grains of truth. When you speak poorly about somebody and you're gossiping, they taught that you're taking someone's, they called it internal representation of somebody like, I'm not gonna use anyone on this call. Let's just, God, I'm trying to think of somebody. I'm just gonna say like Madonna. Okay. This is just like Madonna, the singer. Right? If I said, by the way, guys, did you know that Madonna is like really into, I don't know, I'm just making something up. I don't want to get sued. She has like a foot fetish, okay? She has a foot fetish. She's really into feet, all right? And then keep that in your head for a minute. And then later I go, just kidding. I just said that as just to be funny. Whatever, which is true. Now, in your head, from now on, you're going to have Madonna has this foot fetish, even though you know it's not true. So they talked about when you say something about somebody, you change the internal representation of that person forever, positive and negatively. I know Tia Leving. She was on my podcast. She's a New York Times bestseller. She's such a baller. She's a badass. She's amazing. It's a positive shift of somebody if they don't know you. That's a really nice thing to do. And that's like uplifting somebody. Speaking dishonorably lowers somebody. And it is violent. It is violent. It is the worst thing you could do. So when somebody ever said anything negative about Keith, it was like dishonorable and violent. So I just wouldn't even read it. I didn't even want to read it because I didn't want to change my internal representation of him, even if I knew it wasn't true.
Yeah.
So
Very
that's,
Christian, actually.
I'm sure. Yeah. A lot of I've since realized in the last 7 years of doing a little bit culty that I was in an evangelical personal development group. Yeah, that's what I was. So anyway, that's how they protected us from getting information. I just didn't believe it.
Can I just add here real quick? I don't know if everybody's familiar with this. I'm sure this is a group of very intelligent people. Islam is the only religion that has actually, by law, can declare fatwas if you criticize the religion or if you criticize figures of the religion. We all probably know Salman Rushdie and what's happened to him. And we all know that if you look at like in history, you can criticize any religion, you can criticize, characters and prophets and all of that. But the only one that has never been criticized is the prophet of the Islamic religion and Islam itself. Anytime that's happened in cartoons or things like that, there's always been huge threats, death threats. So it's really scary. If any of you have watched Kunk on Earth, if you know what I'm talking about, does anybody know what I'm talking about? Okay,
Yeah,
Kunk on Earth. Okay, it's on Netflix. Anyway, there's this one segment where she decides to talk about Islam, and the entire time she's talking, it's like either wind comes or something happens where she's muted. You can't hear her. So obviously there's irony in her doing that. It's a comedy, but the idea that the entire show talks and addresses all religions and all cultures and all things, but the moment they came to talk about Islam, somehow a glitch happened and we couldn't hear what she had to say. So that just tells you at a global level how completely impossible it is to even question or criticize or critique talking about information. That's what I can contribute to that.
And the modern day version of that, or what's happening right now, is you're an Islamophobe. If I say
Exactly.
and that's happened on our podcast. We had Jasmine on, and I've been called terrible things because of that.
It's similar in my group. As soon as I got out of the polygamous cult at 17, I went straight onto a reality TV show to talk about it. And it's like there's one moment where you're trusted in the community, and then as soon as you're out, you are slandered, right? And it's how to control your members is you don't have to control me. You can't control me anymore. I'm out. So they just have to control the narrative of who I am and my character. And as long as they tear down my character, now none of the followers can trust and believe in what I'm saying.
Yes, they're still doing that, by the way, with me. They said that I lied, that I did know that I was going to get a brand, and therefore everything I've said after that can be trusted because I lied.
Oh, wow.
Well, that's what to which I said, okay, let's say I knew I was going to get a brand. It doesn't fucking change it.
Doesn't make it better. Yeah, no.
They still lied about
Yeah.
Keith's initials on my body and like the fact that he was in charge of the whole thing. And for those who don't know, that he was basically creating a blackmail MLM pyramid scheme using women, pretending that to be.
It's funny that they can criticize you, but they're not allowed to criticize the leadership. It's like there's a lot of
No.
hypocrisy that happens.
Well, they've been trained for so many years that he knows best. Just like I said at the beginning, like he's God. So if he were to make a mistake, you can't even perceive it as that. He obviously was doing it for a reason that we just don't understand.
Right. And I want to talk about the convert experience because there are a couple of you here. I think, Sarah, we could include you in like a convert type of way. And also, Jasper, you were brought in as a teen to the Mennonites. I want to talk about what it was like when you joined and how they were able to get you to quiet your intuition and make it so you were ignoring the red flags if they were successful in that.
Yeah. So my family went into fundamentalism whenever I was 9. They pulled me out of public school, and then I went into homeschooling, and then through that, leading into how information control, it all segues. They have their own publishing companies. And so through their publishing companies, we came into contact within the Mennonite churches. So it was like this slow progression of gaslighting and love bombing, which they're very good at. I always say that the church is the narcissist and everybody that is a member is just the flying monkey. So it is a slow boil. You're not going to jump right in. And it depends on the family. So my family was very unique in the situation that they were not in a financial stress. They were college educated. They weren't really experiencing anything except they were very interested in more of a traditional, like you look at the trad wife movement now, and that was really my family in the late 80s. They really wanted that homesteading life. And so me joining in, it looks so good on the outside. I can see, and I always say that this is the appeal that people have of the Amish and Mennonite churches. It looks pretty, and there's a lot of aspects that are, and they have an amazing sense of community, but that also the flip side of that is that you can trust no one ever. They will always sell you down the river to save themselves. Nobody will ever keep your own integrity and name intact. Like it is a dog eat dog world. So for us, like joining in, it was a slow mental psychological breaking down. I have direct memories of certain things that happened to me that are very traumatic, where I was, my things were taken from me. And that was like the number one thing, is obviously like having to let go of your entire identity, your clothing, any sort of hobby, anything that mattered. And then all of a sudden they come for your friends and they come for all of those things. It is this slow stripping away of your identity until you don't have anything. And so then you completely rely on them. And so they really just psychologically just try to break you as much as possible. I say this after interviewing so many people on my podcast that had joined in. It is more difficult for people to join in, I feel, because you are always in a state of proving. No matter if you become married, you are always questionable because you have outside information. For me, I'd gone to public school through 3rd grade, so I had access to encyclopedias, whereas these children didn't whenever I went to Mennonite school. So I was never to be fully trusted. And I see this story time and time again with everybody that has been joining into the church. You're never quite fully there. You never arrive. And so that does something psychologically to you as well, because it is such a community-based church that you never belong. And they make it very apparent in subtle ways. They make sure that you're not invited if you're not a family member to something, but everybody's related. So you're the only person that's not going out of the whole church to a function. It's just all of these ways of making you feel less than.
Can I ask a question, Jasper? I'm really curious. So then what is the purpose in recruiting people in, if it's meant to be exclusively for people who are completely cut off from the world? Do you know?
That's a really great question. And that's a major difference between the Amish and Mennonites, because oftentimes there's a confusion of who's more conservative, who's more liberal. And the Mennonites have more of a missionary heart than the Amish. The Amish don't really try to recruit anybody. They don't want anybody really in their club. The Mennonites do. A lot of it is ego. They do prison ministry. They do all of these sorts of ways in order to make themselves look appealing and that they are doing the ministry of Christ. They hand out tracts. They go and sing in the subway. They do all of these things. And so they adopt prison babies, and then there's such a caste system within the community that they will treat you less than, but it makes them feel like they are doing some sort of mission work. So you become the mission.
Thank you. Thank you for.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
To answer Shalise about how Nexium, what was it? How they dismantled our intuition?
Yeah, how they got you to ignore your intuition or slowly ignore red flags to the point where you were fully invested.
Yeah. So with Nexium, it starts with executive success programs, which is a 5-day training. And just like they did the whole dishonorable thing, the whole information control, they were very, very good at setting us up to ignore red flags. And it looks something like this. And this is something I've since learned is quite common in NLP, which neuro-linguistic programming, which is in a lot of these personal development groups, Tony Robbins, Landmark, and all of these big LGATs, large group awareness trainings, use very similar things. Keith called it lifts. So the first lift was to get everybody to agree that we were there to work on ourselves. It's like when you see someone in the front of the room that's sort of generating a yes, like, everyone having a good time? I was just on a cruise and the cruise director's like, who's having a good time? You're like, yeah, and you just get that yes, right? And then it was, wouldn't you agree that everyone who's successful has areas that they want to work on? Of course. I'm here to work on myself. And wouldn't you also agree that when you're working through your stuff, working through your shit, whatever you want to call it, it's going to be uncomfortable? Of course. Right. So when you get uncomfortable, it means you're hitting up against something that you're here to work on. You paid good money to be here. Don't leave. Don't bolt. Stick around. Let's work through that discomfort. When you're uncomfortable, we're going to show you things. We're going to do things in this first 5 days to make you uncomfortable. Great. We're hitting up against it. Not you're uncomfortable because it's a red flag and things are weird and you're going to get the fuck out. No. So I committed right from the beginning. I'm going to sit through that discomfort, which again is partly true. Like, I've been to real therapy. It's uncomfortable to look at parts of yourself that you don't like, right? But when it's all mixed in with like, okay, we're calling this Keith guy Vanguard, and I have to wear a fabric piece of cloth around my neck to look like martial arts, which I also loathed. I was terrible at karate and did not like that whole system. Like all of these red flags, but I didn't know them as red flags. I was like, okay, I'm uncomfortable because I'm pointing to my issues, which again, were partly true. I did have some authority issues and I did have some some problems with like going up a measurable thing like karate or swim class or ballet. I wasn't good at that. So all of these things were happening at the same time. And I was like, well, I'll stick it out. And I couldn't get my money back. So
It's like
might as well.
persuasion and validation.
And well, it's the matter of like you're twisting you take that little truth and you twist it. Like in my group, we said memory gems every single day, which was like, it's so culty, right? You're saying the same words like as a chant. And one of the verses we would say in there is, I will learn to like to do the things that I ought to do. And so that was something as children we're saying every single day. And it's to train yourself that these things that are hard, you don't get into heaven. It's not easy. You're going to go through these hard things, and it trains you that you need to endure these things to prove your worthiness, right? So then it just makes this really bad relationship that you have with yourself. You now don't know if you're feeling uncomfortable because it's something that is not supposed to be happening, or you are supposed to be enduring it, right?
Yeah,
So then you just
I've
have to
totally
rely on.
noticed that.
Yep.
In
Exactly.
every religion we've covered in our 200 episodes, especially the Christian ones, it's like any doubt is like, no, that's just Satan,
Yeah.
right? Or like,
Doubt
no,
your
that's
doubts.
doubt your doubts. That's the devil. Like, no, that's your fucking doubts. And
Yeah.
speaking of chants, could I just read something real quickly?
Yes.
12-point mission statement, which we said multiple times a day, every day that we were there. I'm not going to read all 12 points, but success is an internal state of clear, honest knowledge of what I am, my value in the world, and my responsibility for the way I react to all things. There are no ultimate victims. Therefore, I will not choose to be a victim.
Wow.
That was the first 2 points of 12. And like, it's all in there. The whole setup is in the 12-point mission statement. And we committed to it. And then we'd say, I'm committed to my success. So if I had a doubt, then I'm not committed to my success. So it's all the same shit, just slightly different wording. Sorry about the
suffer for the Lord is something that we heard all the time, or suffering is just you getting stronger, or suffering is a test. I'm wondering if anyone else here heard that they should be suffering in order to be doing it right.
Oh, yeah. Take up your cross and follow me. I mean, you are supposed to align with the crucifixion on a daily basis, and you're more holy the more you suffer. So it's you're intentionally going through hard things. Like, I relate so much to what you were just saying, because it's like this equal parts persuasion and validation, and then like a self-masochism. Like you are trying. It's good when it's hard. It's more validating when it's hard. And like crucifixion was a modern execution and method in Roman times. So it's just like having an electric chair everywhere. You know, it's like the cross is everywhere. You cannot escape it. You go shopping, you're going to find the cross. Like people put it in their babies' nurseries. You know, it's everywhere. So you're constantly thinking about suffering.
Yeah, and I want to add where the teaching that I grew up with was more in line with the reason why you don't get to have all the amazing things and the joy and the pleasures of life is because you're holding off for when you're in heaven and it's eternal. And so instead of having it now and, doing it in a gross, corrupt, human, earthly, fleshy way, hold off, because in eternity, it's going to be amazing. Now, let's not forget that in eternity, those who are getting the amazing things are primarily men. Women are getting some things, but it's the men who are getting the extreme rewards. But because women have very little, even what little is offered to them in heaven sounds amazing. And so it's like, okay, I definitely want that for eternity, even if it is, however percent, small percent it is of what men are promised and given as a final reward.
That is such an interesting topic. I have to know from everybody, well, first starting with you, Jasmine, what were the rewards in heaven for women for you?
Okay, I'll say we do not get 70 virgins. We don't, women don't get that. They do potentially get to drink from the rivers of wine, because there will be rivers of wine. There'll be, food. But if I think about specifically, what are some of the specific rewards, and I could be wrong. I'm sure the comments are going to explode with all the million awards that are listed that I'm not aware of, but I don't remember being taught them. If they are in the scripture, great, but we as women are not taught necessarily and given kind of that thing to aspire for. The only thing that we had to aspire for, or to aspire to, was to please God and to ultimately, get heaven as the reward, so that we can then, maybe we didn't have to wear a hijab. Maybe that was one of them.
Wow. So pretty basic. I think.
We got streets of
As
gold.
far as I remember, I grew up 25 years there. I was taught. This is a great question. I have never entertained the thought of even going to look for it, because it just seemed so non-existent in terms of, it was just, everything will be better in heaven.
Mhm.
So hold off now so that you get everything you want later. But it wasn't necessarily listed specifically to women.
Yeah.
We got streets of gold. We got to see Jesus,
Yep.
and we would get to see our loved ones, and sit at the right hand of God. We get to see men sit at the right hand of God, and they weren't very attractive rewards for a teenager or for a young woman. I mean, other than seeing your lost loved ones again. But I was always jealous of the Mormons, because I think you get your own planet.
Hold on.
Yeah.
I was just
Yeah, that's
saying,
pretty cool.
you get to see your loved ones. I only get to see my loved ones if they did everything right. And then maybe we'll
Well,
be in the
there's
same
that.
level
There
as
is that.
heaven. And what comes with your own planet, though, if you get to the celestial kingdom, you got to get to the top, because the middle or the bottom two you don't get genitals. So if you're at the top,
Wait,
this is
what
the
happened to
thing.
your genitals?
What?
It's they're gone. You don't get the pleasure of procreating in the bottom two levels of heaven. So if you make it to the top level of heaven and you get your own planet, which they recently did away with, bummer for everybody, is you get to be eternally pregnant from your husband, so that you can populate with your sister wives the whole planet. Doesn't that sound like an amazing
Yay.
Sounds
reward?
great.
Eternally pregnant. And we're not talking about spiritual babies. You have your physical body resurrected, all there. You get to give birth for eternity.
Do you get to have an epidural for eternity?
Highly doubt it.
And this,
Yeah.
Suffer for the Lord.
I think this is still another way they control women, right? Because in these societies where women are having lots of babies, you're also often losing lots of babies and children.
Mhm.
And so the promise of you get to see them again. My mother lost a son last year, and she is very much dealing with, so there's just nothing, and it's like she misses that promise of the idea that it was all going to be worked out.
In the afterlife, yeah.
We were given very vague ideas of what the afterlife would look like. Like, there was that concept, very vague, but there was something they did that I don't know if it's done anywhere else. So we were taught that women are more holy and more special, and that is why we don't need to do these commandments. There was a whole men every single day, boys would say a blessing thanking them for not being created as a woman. Okay. And we would say a blessing, thank you for being created the way we are. But somehow they managed to twist it and to explain to us that it's because we were already like born holy, we're closer to God, we don't have to do all these commandments, we're not responsible for all those things. So I speak to grown women, okay, in their 40s and 50s who are in the community and still believe that. So there's a ritual bath that's extreme, that I think, I've discussed in previous class, that's podcast, that's very abusive and very controlling. But women have been brainwashed that it is the most beautiful time of the month and there is nothing more special. So you have grown people believing that. And it's just the saddest thing. But I was there too. I know what it's like when you have that constant from a young age. Oh, and you have to dress very modestly because your body is so precious. And if you would have a jewel, wouldn't you cover that jewel with all kinds of layers of protection? Like that kind of like mind twisting explanations as to why you are literally being put in a corner. Your face cannot be on any magazine or newspaper distributed in the community. So you're kind of told this whole, it's just like a mind twist that it's really hard to get out of.
Beatrice, I would love for you to really quickly explain for those who aren't familiar with how just even having your menstruation is under a close microscope, because I think the ritual bath here is really relevant in talking about ways that women are controlled within the religions or the communities.
Yeah. So, and again, so this is a ritual that you're only told about right before you get married. So while you're engaged, just to be clear, men also aren't told about this. They learn about it in the Talmud, but it's not really clear to them. So what the ritual is after you get your period, For 7 days, you have to check yourself with a cloth in your vagina with a small square white cloth. And if you have any question about whether you're still seeing blood, right? So you're supposed to check yourself after the bleeding has stopped. You have to show it to a rabbi to verify if it's actually blood or if it's like some other form of discharge. If the rabbi's not sure, you might be sent to a special woman, not a doctor, not a nurse, just a person who will check you and then tell the rabbi what she thinks she saw. And then, so after you make it past that 7 days, then there's a whole process on the last day that involves like a complete cleansing of your body. You have to sit in a bath for over an hour, no nail polish. Sometimes there's an exception for gel, but where I grew up, no nail polish. You have to like make sure there's nothing stuck within the holes of your ears. I had to shave my head, so I shaved my head 3 days before. And then you go into this ritual bath. So there's an attendant that checks you, makes sure there's no stray hairs, there's no hangnails,
This
scabs.
is every month, or this is your
Every
first?
month.
Oh my
Every
God.
month. Every month. And then after that, so you're all checked, you're all clean. You have to go with this attendant into this ritual bath. You go yourself with her, and then she is there to observe to make sure that you go fully under the water, right? So you're go once, the whole process of how you have to hold your hands, say a blessing, and then go in again. And then she says kosher, like kosher food, so like kosher woman, every time where you dunk. And then you go home and you tell your husband, now I'm clean. Because from when you get your period until then, you're not allowed to touch. You're not allowed to touch. You're not allowed to hand the baby. Even if you sit at the same table, you have to put something. You sleep in separate beds. This is what women in the Hasidic community and much of the Orthodox Jewish community go through as part of their regular life.
Your baby.
You're allowed to touch your baby, but you can't give the baby over to your husband. You have to put the baby down on the floor or on the bed or to someone else because you can't be touching him, right?
But then your
What will
child thinks you're
happen?
unclean.
It doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Like you put the baby somewhere.
So is this because I'm sorry, I'm sorry to jump in here. This got me really curious because there are some parallels to Islam. Not so much the husband piece, I don't think. It's more God. God is the piece, I guess, that you need to be super clean to be in connection with. And so, for example, and I know I shared this in the podcast when I was with you, Shalise, is if you are to read your holy book, the Quran, you cannot touch the Quran if you're on your period. You have to literally hold it with a cloth if you were to engage with the Quran, which is not super recommended when you're on your period, but things like that. So anything that's in relation to God had to be separated when a woman's on her period because she is technically unclean. So because in this case, it's the husband, I find that really curious. Is the husband seen as kind of a holy figure or representation of God in this sense?
Well, like sex is supposed to be holy, like it's considered a holy act. You're supposed to think about a rabbi, like during the time of sex, in order to ensure that you have holy children. One way in which it relates to what you're saying is that, so there is the books wasn't a problem, like the holy books, but there's the Torah that's written on special parchment. So when you were on your period, you weren't allowed to look at it. So if you'd go to the synagogue, technically you were able to like peek through the window and maybe see it. But when you were on your period, you weren't supposed to actually look at it.
But you could go to the synagogue when you're on your
yes.
period because you cannot go to the
Yes.
mosque if you're on your period.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
that's so interesting.
You were able to go. Yeah.
These parallels are incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, and like what's mind-boggling is I did a TikTok about it, which got a lot of people very angry. And the amount of women coming on and saying, "It is my most beautiful time of the month. It is my most beautiful time of the month." And it's just like it's just sad. It's just really sad that you can convince what you can convince people of. And I think all of us can talk to the things that, we've been convinced of in our life by belonging to these groups. My daughters are doing the same.
So I just want to say a little footnote of interest here that we've been shamed that we're unclean during our periods. And science, thank God for science, is finding all kinds of miracle cures through menstrual blood right now. They're
Yes, I
finding
just
stem
saw
cells and cure
that.
for Alzheimer's. And my gosh, if that turns out to be the thing that saves us from so many diseases, that's another giant F to the patriarchy. I don't know what your cussing policy is, but
Go for it.
I broke one already.
Women are so powerful, and I think that's kind of the theme of today. Like, women are so powerful. We are all women who have left these groups are speaking up. And like, the more I think about it, of course, in the community, it was like, how much can we push them down? It was like so clear that if they would allow women to have power, like everything would change.
Yeah, and that's just something that was kind of an epiphany for me, was that they had to it's crazy how much the women bring to these groups. They would have nothing if these women weren't bearing all of their children for them, if these women weren't carrying them through to the finish line, basically.
That's
But
right.
how do you keep these women obedient is to, dangle their eternity and guilt and shame them, but also make sure that they don't know their self-worth, because then they'll realize that it's all a facade, right? And I want to touch a little bit
Yes.
on the promises of heaven. What they were promising, when I was starting to really think about what they were promising us, that's actually a big part of why I left, because I was like, we're gonna commit our whole lives as women, carrying these men up, and then we don't even get to have eternity. They still have eternity, you guys.
Yep.
You want to jump in, Daniela?
I think also that all of this focus on menstruation is another way of like guilting and shaming you for not being pregnant, because like you should be pregnant, And I remember my mom started having babies at 14, and she had 7 babies in 14 years. And
Wow.
I remember her telling me once that she could count how many periods she had had in her life because she was just like pregnant or nursing all the time. But when I was hearing Beatrice's description, right, of like the whole ritual, I was just thinking like, oh, it must be such a relief to you then when you are pregnant and you're not going to have to deal with that, which is just another way that they trap.
Another thing I'm remembering is we were told the only way to heaven for women is to support your husband in his Torah studies and take your boys to school to go to their Torah studies. So it was very like that was there was no way for a woman to get there on her own. But again, it was a little vague. They weren't very specific, but that was definitely something that was used a lot in my marriage. For sure.
Yeah, I want to talk about the ways in which women prop up the communities and or their families, starting with you, Amanda, because you were just talking about the dynamic within your family. I want people to understand what it was like in the order as a woman. You don't have, in other fundamentalist Mormon groups, you do have the wives and all of the kids living in the same home, and it's very different. Within the order, they're in separate homes, and the women are not only required to make all of the money and support themselves, the husbands do nothing, and they raise so many children. So, Amanda, can you give some examples, maybe even your own family, what your family unit was like, how many kids, how many wives, and how your mom was expected to basically do everything?
Yeah, and it's just such a popular question on because I do live streams on my YouTube channel, and people will come in and ask like, well, how do these men support all of these women? And that's where the
They
first thing
don't.
goes. And yeah, that's my answer. I'm like, why do you think these men are supporting these families? They don't. That's how they can have all these wives and kids. But so for specifically in my family, my dad has 3 wives. I have 32 siblings. My mom herself had 10 kids at home, and she was expected to help pay all the bills. I'm pretty sure she paid every bill up until she just started refusing or physically could not. So a lot of these mothers will have their babies and then be back to work within the week, having to pay their husband rent, and then they
Pay
will
their husband
struggle.
rent. I can't. I can't.
And it's like, if it's not enough that this woman over here had 18 kids for you, she has to, it's like they're tying the tube of the baby, umbilical cord, and going straight to work. But then they also it trickles down to the children. So now the children are trying to help the household. There was the first wife, I think, had like 4 of her kids in one room, and each of them were paying $300 to the mother. And I think they were all minors at this point, which is illegal. But they don't know this, obviously. They don't know what's healthy and what's not. They're supposed to just be building up the kingdom of God. But these women there's so much pressure to have a baby every single year, provide for all of the children, and then work to support the household. And then how are they supposed to even fulfill all of their duties as a good wife too, right? Like, it's so much put on the women. And I remember my mother being like, well, if I leave, where will I go? It's going to be so much harder out in the world. And I'm like, how? You're doing everything on your own here right now. But I think it's that mental block of like, I've done I think there's many reasons why people stay, but I think my mom, a big part is I have lost everything. I have spent so much time and energy, and they took everything. And there better be a fucking heaven up there because I would, if not, this is all a waste, you know? That sunk cost fallacy.
I also think that here cults play on the isolation of women in the real world, right? Because it is nice to have 4 women get together and cook dinner, right? And it is, I think when people first join cults, especially ones that are communities, away communities like some of us grew up in, it's like, oh, this beautiful kind of idea of a picture, like Jasper was saying, right? Like it looks great and it sounds great to have like all the women pitching in and all the children playing together. And you don't realize that women and children in almost every cult we know of are a servant class. And that, yes, you're getting help with the work, but you never stop working.
The men do, though. The men definitely. I remember when I left, I was like, what the hell are these men doing? Nothing.
That's so interesting. I will say from this standpoint, the experience that I'm here to talk about is the complete opposite. And I think it's one of the reasons why women, especially in, Islamic and especially fundamentalist areas, are content and it continues to grow. And you hear a lot of Western women choosing to become Muslim for that simple reason, is because in essence, they are completely taken care of. The religion requires the man to do everything financially, and whatever it is. The wife's expectation is only to provide a home and to have children and to raise children and to kind of be somewhat there at the beck and call of the husband in terms of being a good wife and a pleasing wife and all of that. But there is no requirement financially on a woman, which again is part of the reason there is such a romanticizing of the religion in that sense and how it treats women, is because there are these little nuggets here and there where there's opportunities for them to say, but this religion is extremely feminist, or it does protect women, or it does defend women. Does it though? Because it's at the cost of, silencing them, their thoughts and ideas, their participation in society, their contributions, whatever they are. Again, nowadays in modern countries, yes, including Saudi Arabia, I'm again generalizing the fundamentalist practice of the religion. In countries like Iran and Afghanistan, that is still very much a thing. I think we tend to forget that, the religion is very vast and it's in so many different parts of the world, not just in the Middle East or the Arab world. And in some of those areas, that's the control that is placed upon women with the excuse that, what are you complaining about? I'm taking care of everything. Is for me, the cost of freedom is priceless. The freedom of my ideas, the freedom of my thought, the freedom of my ability to get to choose what kind of life I want is priceless. And there's no way to silence that by just providing for me or saying, I'm going to treat you like, a queen, which is not the case at all.
Tia, I want to hear from you on this, because I know the experience is similar in the sense that the man is expected to be the head of the household. The woman is supposed to be submissive and take care of all the things around the house, very much gender conforming. And I want to hear your perspective, because I think on the flip side of that, because you do have women, they're like, yeah, I want to be stay-at-home moms, and that's great if that's their choice. I love that for them. On the other hand, for the women who don't want that and are forced into that role and then want to leave, I feel that they're not particularly equipped to handle themselves outside of the household because they haven't had the experience or maybe the education on how to do so. What do you think?
Yeah, this is pretty complicated. You've heard, maybe they talk about it, complementarianism, and it's this idea that men and women have different roles in the family based on their genitalia. And it's pretty, similar to our groups here. The man is the head of the household. The woman does all the labor. You have this Proverbs 31 woman who's this, beacon that we're supposed to emulate. And she's up from sunrise to sunset, long beyond. She does everything for her family. It puts women on this pedestal. But this top-down power structure, she has no true agency of her own. She's supposed to be a manipulative neck that turns the head. That's her only power, is down here. He has all the, leadership. He may not be equipped for that at all. She may be outshining him far and away, certainly the case in my situation. And so I would have to self-subjugate to get really small so that he would not feel threatened because it was so dangerous. Kids who are raised in the quiverful mindset in the evangelical patriarchy do struggle when they want to change their minds, when they want to get out. Some of them don't have diplomas, birth certificates. They've been born off grid. It's just not so simple to like go to work. Um, the trad wife movement that we're seeing happen now, which is really just it's really the same movement that just hit critical mass. It's if we'd had social media back then, that's what it would have looked like. And it's just kind of mainstream now, but it is attractive because fundamentalism is always attractive when in times of chaos. It offers you this simple solution to a very complicated world. And it says, here's a promise and here's a formula. And if you follow it, it will be easier for you, happier for you, more secure, stable. And so these young women who are falling for the trad wife movement they might have every good intention behind their motivation. They might want to just stay home with their children. I loved being home with my babies. They might really love making bread and doing things the old-fashioned way because we have a harried culture and we have no social safety nets. And so the attraction to come back home and live more simply is undeniable. The problem is that when you're locking yourself in, you've taken away your options. If you can't change your mind tomorrow and go to work, you're in danger. That is your flag. If this is just an option for you, great. If you're voting in a way that denies agency for other women, not great. You're part of a system. So it's like I get with much compassion. I get why it's attractive to people, but we have evidence, we have testimonies, we have proofs now for what this looks like. We've been Puritans before, we've been 1950s housewives before. We have something to go on for people to make an informed decision, and it's easier on the outside, I will say. Like, I worked my ass off as a trad wife, and it was easier to be a single parent out in the world than it was a trad wife living in patriarchy.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, something else I wanted to mention for those of you who are born into a group where that was your only reality, it's all that you ever knew. Did you clock the misogyny early on? Did you clock the injustices towards women? Was it just part of your reality? You didn't really notice it? Or if you did notice it, is that when you started to, I think, Amanda, you already said this, is that when you started to want to get away from the cult or start to make your transition out?
I think puberty was what made me start to be like, wait a minute, why do these men get to have multiple wives? Because as a kid, you joke around with your classmates and you even get excited that you could be sister wives, right? But once you hit puberty and you realize what that means, that's when I started to be like, okay, there's obvious roles that are unfair. And it was like jealousy is a real thing. And a lot of even my friends who didn't even experience public school had that same feeling of jealousy, and jealousy is frowned upon. So it's like, how can I be a good polygamous wife when there's obviously it's such an unequal lifestyle that they're forcing us to live.
And you have actual sister wives. So wives that are married to the same man who are real biological sisters.
So my mom married as the second wife, and her older sister was the first wife. So it's sisters sharing the same husband. And then you also had my dad who married his own half sister. So it was like all forms of sister wives happening there.
Do they worry about genes? Does that ever come up?
Yes. So they started doing blood testing because Ortel, who was the leader who started doing incest, he was trying to get his nieces pregnant as one of his many wives, but he kept having issues with the babies were stillborn or they couldn't understand. We could go into so much depth, but the short answer is they started to do blood testing to see which kids could marry each other because they would need to keep that bloodline pure. So there's a big, incest. They don't even believe that that's a thing. They think that I've argued with members saying that the government just wants to convince us that incest is bad, but it's not. I'm like, okay, you can't argue with that, I guess.
I guess not.
So anyone else want to jump in on ways, if you were born and raised in the cult, ways in which you did or did not notice the misogyny? or the patriarchy?
Being Jewish is complicated. Talking about DNA, it shows up in your DNA. People say, oh, so you're ex-Jewish. I'm like, that's really hard when you take a DNA test and it actually says Jewish. But I was definitely a little rebellious as a teenager, but I was more rebellious because I knew other people who were Orthodox, not Hasidic, and I was upset why I couldn't be like them. But I didn't know, even though I didn't live in a compound, I lived in a house in a nice suburban neighborhood in Canada. I didn't know anybody who wasn't Orthodox or Hasidic. So the idea of not being part of that, and like the way we spoke about other Jewish communities, right? So there are many Jewish communities, like over 90% of the Jewish world is not Orthodox, and like only maybe 4 or 5% is Hasidic. So it's a very small minority that is very liberal, and like women play very similar roles to men, or if not the same. But it was so like those weren't considered Jews for us. Like it was just like so not a possibility. It was like a joke. We would like laugh about them. Like they were jokes to us, right? We'd have like a temple next to us where people would drive to on Shabbat, on Saturday, and it was like not our reality. For me, it was a big wake up call and a big shock when I left my marriage, because there was a certain trust I had in the rabbis that I would be protected, because I don't know why I trusted them, but I did. And then when I was betrayed so badly by them helping or trying to take away the children that I had managed to take with me, I was so shocked. I think sometimes I'm still in shock that I actually saw the underside of things and like was able to I was shocked by the reality of what I lived with, the misogyny and just like so much more, and that I left. But it took me till I had 10 children and was 40 years old to be willing to contemplate the idea that it's possible to live a different way.
Wow. Well, I'll say for me, it was very, very different. And listening to you, Beatrice, it's really, really overwhelming because for me, I was born in it, but my mom is Italian and my dad is Arab. And so I got to see the Western world through my mom's culture and heritage because we traveled to Italy. I got to see my Italian relatives. I got to see one of the most incredible and modern countries in the world, and then go back and see my mom and all the women around me cover in one part, like cover from head to toe, and then I travel and women were dressed normally. So I have no memory of me not knowing. Let me rephrase that. As far as I have a memory, I knew something was off and something was odd and something didn't feel right. So, I turned out to be the black sheep of the family. I turned out to be the oddball. How and why, I have no idea. But ever since I have a memory, 2 or 3 years old, I knew there was something really off about this because it just didn't seem right that because I was a girl, I had to be treated a certain way or do certain things. My brother got to do certain things and I couldn't do other things. So for me, it was very, very obvious from the very beginning, which made it a lot harder, obviously, and made it a lot more complicated once you hit puberty, because in your head, you have all these ideas. It's not just happening in your body, but you've already kind of accumulated a view of the world, and you have no way to express that, no way to talk about it, because you're essentially threatened if you were to go against it. So I'm not the greatest example to address what it feels like to be born into it, because I had this little glitch in my mental system that showed me the outside world. I wasn't in the Truman Show completely.
Now, I would say that I was born completely isolated, 3 generations into it. So I didn't even have, the concept of grandparents on the outside. But yet I had the same glitch that you had. Like from the beginning, I was just like, nope, not doing this. Like, I don't know what this is. I very specifically remember at 11 years old, they put me in the kitchen to cook dinner for the whole commune because my mom had just had a baby and my sisters were out fundraising. And I was like, there are men just sitting over in this office that are full grown adults. And then I just became the cook. And like, that was what I did for the next 5 years. I was the kitchen slave. And ironically, right around 11, I started making my plans to be like done with this, right? But, we were all used as labor so hard in the Children of God that I think there wasn't as much pronounced difference between the boys and the girls. But you could certainly see it with the grown-ups, I think, all the time. And it was just never right. Like and I say this too, and it makes it hard with the recovery community, right? Because if we were being raised as women to be submissive and we were supposed to be the Bible women, serving at the feet of King David, and the boys who are our peers are being raised to then ultimately like dominate us, right? Or be kind of like our oppressors. And so it's really interesting and weird and confusing, I think, when you leave. But I also think this is why it's harder for the men to leave and the boys when they're born in, because their world is a little bit easier maybe than on the outside, where you don't have someone to cook all your food and have all your babies and just do all this stuff automatically for you.
Okay, so after all of this, trying to analyze your childhood or analyze your current surroundings, peeking outside of the matrix, but still a little bit afraid, what was it in each of your situations that made you feel brave enough to say, you know what, I'm out? I know we've heard snippets from everybody a little bit here and there. I want the full details. What was it that made you say, no way, even if it's scary, I'm leaving?
I definitely feel like there was multiple things, but obviously I talked about polygamy was one. Like I just did not want to live polygamy, and especially knowing that we're gonna live polygamy in the afterlife too. I'm like, why live it here then if I'm just gonna go to heaven and live it eternally? And then my unborn kids that I didn't even have, the idea of having daughters and telling them that they have to submit to polygamy, to incest. Like I thought maybe I could do it for my ticket, but I would rather die than have to watch my daughters and me have to silently say, yep, you need to do these things, and you're just gonna have to white knuckle it through life. And that's what I brought you into. You're welcome. I couldn't do that. And so at 15, I was making my decision, like trying to figure out how to leave, but it was so scary. And I don't know if any of you girls had this same experience, but I think my brain gaslit myself into thinking it wasn't going to be as bad as it was when I left. I gaslit myself into thinking that my family would not disown me. I know all the teachings of disowning. I know what happens to people that leave, but I gaslit myself into thinking that my family was different. And I think I had to do that to make that jump.
I can relate to that. For me, the first step was leaving my marriage. And I was sure that even though my parents didn't want me to leave, like they would support me once I left. But in fact, my father came to court with my ex-husband, determined to support him. So that was, again, such a shock. Like it shouldn't have been. Like now, 10 years later, looking back, like, yeah, that made so much sense. But I had convinced myself it wouldn't be as bad, for sure. I think we do that.
What was your moment, Beatrice? Because you were a mom to 10 children at this point when you decided to leave.
So I first left my marriage. And when I left my marriage, I never thought I would leave the community because divorce is technically allowed. And I knew some people who were divorced. Being where I was in the status of the community was a big deal. But still, like there were it was very uncommon, but it was heard of. But then again, as I mentioned earlier, I was, first of all, I lost like my older children, right? They were just between everything that was between the pressure of the community, my parents, they were like, I basically lost them. My oldest 6 children, and I managed to leave with my youngest 4. And then the rabbis tried to do everything to take those youngest 4 from me, but they were not successful. Thank goodness. We live in New York State. They do not accept arbitration in custody matters. So anybody out there who's listening to this, like be really careful if you sign any papers, even if it's to a religious leader, like those can have legal ramifications. But I was able to fight that in family court. It almost felt like I lost everything, right? I lost my standing in the community. I lost my family. I lost everything. For me, the choice to leave was like, as I was doing my healing work, realizing there's no way I can live as a healthy, healed person in this world while I have that belief system in place. The belief system that tells me there is a God who has these rules, 613 to be exact, and you must follow all these rules in order to be okay with God, with people. And I was like, that doesn't work for me. You know, I do participate sometimes in Jewish ritual because whatever, it's cool. I live in New York. There's lots of cool stuff, but like never, ever. First of all, I will never step into a place that's segregated by men and women. Second of all, I will never do something because I feel like I should. ever, because that's wrong. So for me, it was a lot like my mental health, but it wasn't really my mental health because I was okay. But it was more about like, how will I thrive in this world? How will I be able to live fully? It was only after I actually left that I started deconstructing the beliefs. And I remember somebody telling me, the afterlife isn't real. This was like after I'd left. I was like, oh my gosh, you're probably right. But like for me, I didn't leave because I didn't think there was afterlife. I left because where I am today, I lost 6 of my children. I'm fighting with I'm fighting with a whole community that's funding this custody battle. Like if I want to live and thrive, I need to be able to truly live freely. And I will say one of my first moments is on a Friday night, okay? My hair uncovered, walking down Manhattan Street to a Broadway show is like one of my most like precious memories as truly living as a free woman.
Wow.
What was the show?
Of course it was Fiddler on the Roof.
I love it. By the way, I was one of the Jews that your Jewish group laughed at because not only was I very reformed, but we had a woman rabbi.
I know a lot of lovely women rabbis.
I had an interesting moment because I was being kicked out
For
because
rebelling.
for, breaking the biggest rule. I always say if they think they can keep you, then they try, and exorcisms are not fun. So I was like launching my campaign to break the worst of rules to get myself kicked out. And so I was being kicked out until they kind of thought about it and realized that I was a little bit cult famous, as were my parents, and that maybe they didn't want to lose their oldest 3rd generation and maybe they should try. And so I remember they started sending all these cool young women leaders that had grown up in the cult to try to like encourage me to stay. And because it's scary to lose absolutely everything in your life when you're 15 years old, I was thinking about it, right? And it was like, okay, I'll have to move to another commune. I'll have to do 6 months of like extra labor and dedication and getting pure and all of this stuff. And then my mother, who was also born and raised in the cults, took me on a walk outside the commune and she was like, go, just go. We've already found a spot for you. Just go. And even at the time, I remember this being like, she's sobbing because she thinks she's losing me forever. And I'm not, who knows where we're going to end up in heaven. And I asked her this years later, like as I was writing my book, I was like, why did you tell me that? Like, you still thought the children of God, the family was like it. And she just said, like, I could see you were miserable. Like, I could see it in your face that you were so miserable and you had never been happy and we weren't going to keep you either way. So anyways, my like to give credit to her there, that even when she couldn't like leave herself yet, she just tipped the scale for me and got me out of there, and my life would have been completely different.
All right, Tia, what about you?
Yeah, mine I waited too long. It was a life or death moment, and there was the big awareness of the complicity that I was under, that I was going to raise kids that thought this was okay, and I was going to raise daughters that stayed with somebody that beat her, and boys that beat women, and that I had known that. I had been on a 7-year awakening. We'd been excommunicated. All these things had happened. And it was my insistence on staying in a damaging marriage like that would condone it. And that's if we survived it, because violence was ramping up so much. And so we had a very harrowing midnight escape. I grabbed them at midnight after 4 hours of being held hostage. And it's a miracle how I got out. But it's interesting because I've been listening to like different ones of like when Amanda, when you said you were gaslighting yourself, I was like, I don't think I was even thinking what it was like on the outside. All I was thinking was, you can't stay. You can't stay. That no matter how hellish it is out there, and I did assume the world would be hell, I couldn't bear what I was in anymore. And so it was a breaking point. And when I talk to survivors now, or women who are thinking about getting out, I always say, don't wait so long. Don't wait until it's the last exit on the highway. I cut it too close. We were very, very easily not here. And I just really send that warning to women who are, if you feel that much commonality with our stories and you think you're in that kind of danger, make plans during the daylight. Don't wait until you play a role in your own danger at that point. of waiting and hanging in there. So, all of that indoctrination and belief that it was my willingness to keep my marriage together that was going to please God. I kind of had to be willing to give it all up at one time, because I was like, if this loses me God, then so be it, because I don't want to die for this. I was very clear. I don't want to die for this.
It's so scary too. And when you're in those positions too, it's not I always hate when people are like, "Well, if you're in an abusive relationship, then just get out." It's never that simple.
Fuck them.
I wish.
Yeah, it's not that easy.
Yeah, there's so much pull on and just like that, I was married too even after the cult, and I had that I can't throw this marriage away. If God put us together for a reason, there's all this emotional guilt. Like, even though you're mentally so far gone from the marriage, but you feel like you just have to drag yourself through it for God, right?
Yeah. Sarah, what was your experience like?
God, there's so much. I mean, I was there for 12 years, and there were so many things that were not good that I saw and then dismissed or couldn't wrap my head around. And ultimately, any bad thing that should have woken me up was always outweighed by the good stuff until, and this is partly why why I keep talking about, my experience in Nexium, is because similar to what someone just said about the domestic violence. Why don't you just leave? Why don't I just leave Nexium when things weren't good? They weren't bad enough until they were really bad. And what ended up being the tipping point for me was getting branded, and not actually the brand itself, but finding out weeks later that the symbol on my body was the leader's initials, which had been withheld from me. And that was a betrayal that not only obviously enraged me to no end, but also just lifted the curtain of clarity of all the things that I had seen in the past, or like, remember I said the articles that like I'd heard about but not read, or rumors, like all those things are now true. He's not the most ethical man in the world. He is a sex addicted, narcissistic, sociopathic douchebag. Like, what polygamist. Like, let's add that to because he had a harem. Oh, that's not his executive board. That's his harem of women that he has access to, who are basically his sex slaves. And I'm part of this. Like, what in the actual fuck? I'm in a Tony Robbins type personal development program. Now I'm part of a sex cult. Like, it was such a fucking slap in the face wake up call. And the exit went different stages. Partly why I wanted to write a book about it, because it wasn't just like, okay, I'm leaving. It was like, I can't participate in this anymore, obviously. And if you ever watch The Vow, HBO's The Vow, which did a really great job in kind of telling the whole story, unfortunately, it's not linear. You can't really see, like, I was having major doubts and was trying to plan my escape before that's shown in The Vow. It's a bit hard to explain. Like, there was many moments where I wanted to not be a part of, and this is complicated. If anyone's listening doesn't know my whole story, like, read the book, watch The Vow, because it's very many things happened. But there was DOS, which was the secret women's group inside Nexium, which I'd committed to. I was like a sorority. I was like, okay, I'm getting out of that, but I didn't realize I was getting out of Nexium because I didn't realize how intertwined it all was yet. So I was like, okay, I have to get out of DOS because this is like blackmail. I didn't realize I'd be leaving Nexium, leaving my whole community, leaving my friends. But because, like I said earlier, I did have a foot in reality. I lived in Vancouver, away from everything. I had somewhere to go. I had a huge safety net. So in many ways, like, when people say, "Oh, you're so brave for speaking out," like, I don't really totally own that, because I had a safety net to land, a very, very safe place to land, and I'm very lucky in that way. Brave maybe in terms of facing Nexium, in terms of being litigated, or maybe having somebody come after me. People did die around Keith and have continued to. And so, like, that is scary. But in terms of like my own safety, I was okay. I still kind of, what's the word? I'm still careful, but I had to leave, and then I had to speak. As soon as I realized how how bad it was. Like the reasons that I left were even just the tip of the iceberg of how bad it actually was. So the more information I got about what was actually going on, I felt it was my responsibility, especially as a leader, somebody who recruited a lot into NXIVM, that not only did I have to lead, but I had to take it down, expose it, and dismantle it. So yeah, there's a lot there. It's hard to encapsulate in a little soundbite.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, wow, that's terrifying. And we do appreciate what you do on your podcast now, continuing to speak about it and have guests on as well to share their stories, some of who are on this call right now.
Yeah.
So
And some of
Jasmine.
whom I'd love to have on, just putting out there.
Yes, yes, they're all amazing. Everyone
Yeah,
here is
please.
incredible.
Love it.
Jasmine, let's hear from you.
Well, it's so interesting because even though I say this all the time, my story is uncommon. It's not unique, and we can hear that here today. Because I grew up where I grew up, and it was my family's home and culture, and it was my dad's culture. I was kind of raised with the idea that this is it, right? This is you're a Saudi girl. You're going to grow up here. You're going to marry a Saudi man. And in the back of my mind, I always had the whole kind of fantasy and the just trying to manifest in my head that fantasy so that I could live in it. But, I tried what was asked of me to do. I married a Saudi man. I tried to, do life as a modern Saudi woman. And this is in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when the laws and the rules were still extremely oppressive and conservative and restrictive. And things have changed now since 2018. Women can drive, and now women can, do things without the permission of a guardian. But when I was growing up there, everything had to be done with a literal, written, legal document that gave women permission to do whatever it is they wanted to do: go to school, travel, open a bank account, work, anything that a woman wanted to do there outside of the home had to be legally approved of by a legal guardian. So up until that point, it was unfathomable that a woman could just up and leave. Some women have attempted it before me, and none succeeded. They were either, caught at the airport or caught right before they left, and the ramifications of that were horrific. For some, it was death. For others, it was, punishment for the rest of their lives. And so before me, I had no example that anyone had left successfully. But after my failed first marriage, and much like what Amanda said, my future children in my head were definitely, a reason for me to say, I always wanted to be a mother, but I couldn't imagine being a mother there. I just couldn't even picture it. It just felt like an absolute horror story. So after the divorce, I thought, I'm damaged goods, because now if I were to get married again, I'd be a second or third or fourth wife, because polygamy is alive and well in Islam as well, limited to 4 wives, but still. But I didn't want to be a second or third or fourth wife because I was damaged good. I was, I was in my mid-20s. I was 25 years old, and this is 1999. And so I just decided I'm going to figure out a way to plot this escape, and I did, and I did it in a way that was unfortunate that, I had to kind of manipulate the system because I had to get that permission from my dad to leave. And I had a decent relationship with my father. I loved my father. I respected him. I didn't, he was not an abusive father. He was a wonderful, kind man. But he was also a member of a society and a community where he had the pressure of also showing to society that he raised these perfect, Arab kids and Saudi kids. And but for me, it was at that point I had reached the breaking point of, it was like a complete, crisis of purpose. If I'm not going to be able to exist in the way that I feel right for me to exist, then I can't exist anymore. And so I did write a memoir, and so I detail in the memoir, what that looked like. But essentially that was my breaking point. Was I tried the marriage, it didn't work, and now I have to plunge and see if it works. And lo and behold, I was lucky enough to actually successfully be able to leave. And as far as I'm concerned, after I did that, I'm very thrilled and grateful and thankful to know that many women have succeeded after me and have been able to escape and to get out of Saudi Arabia, and families that were far more, repressive and oppressive than my own family. My family was not, but I had to do what I had to do because of the way the system was in society at the time. And now things have changed, and that's great. So, I don't take any credit for that, but I do know that things are moving and changing, because all it takes is for one person, And in this case, all of us here are proof of that. Is and as Tia said, for anyone listening, all it takes is for you to really believe that you can follow what your gut is telling you is the right thing for you to do. And there is help out there. Once you go to the other side, there's always going to be someone, ready to receive you and to walk you through the process. So it is doable. These are not miracles.
Wow. Okay. Jasper, we got you back, I think, for a minute.
Hopefully. For a minute.
Let's talk about you, the moment that you realized you needed to get out and how you managed to do that.
So I didn't really have like a moment. I don't think I had the aha moment because I never wanted to leave. I was just really forced into making a decision and recognizing that because there was no future for me that I wanted within the community. They would not let me marry the person that I was in love with and that loved me back. And so, and they took everybody away from me and they broke me. I mean, really, truly, like I have to be very honest with that. And I just reached this point where I was lifeless for a really long time. And so I couldn't keep existing that way and stay alive. And so I left, and then I actually went back. I tried to join again for a while. So my process was a little different because I think that looking at the logistics of like where our church is, I was in Southern Illinois at this point, and there's no more there's not liberal churches here versus if you go into like Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and like Holmes County, Ohio, there's just varying degrees of churches. And at that like I still recognize I probably would have gone to a more liberal church instead of having to make a decision. Do I stay in this conservative church or do I go worldly? And so because of that, I had to make a decision. And so I was also in therapy at the time, which was not allowed. And I've actually been talking to my therapist from when I was that age. He's actually going to come on my podcast. So, because I have journals that I've been going through over the last year about our entries of this time period. And so I reunited with him last year and was able to tell him how much, he truly saved my life. And because of his impact, I've been able to impact so many people. And that is a true testimony to having one person in your corner. He was the only person that really believed in me for me and ever helped me feel seen. And so I just tell him all that all the time, and he's always embarrassed. But anyway, I had one person, and it truly takes one person to lay out those fundamentals that, that the power of positive thinking, I was so consumed with my body image. Like this is something that I don't know about anybody else in your cults, but for us, perfectionism was this attainable, like if I could just be perfect, if I could be the perfect Mennonite girl with the perfect Mennonite hair and, the clothing and the right socks and all of this and the mannerisms and the just the meek and gentle spirit and not making too much eye contact, but making eye contact enough that they knew that you were engaged and you were, funny, but not too loud. Like if you could just reach that pinnacle of how you and look that way, then you would be accepted. And so my body image was a big issue for me as a teenager. And anyway, so a lot of my journals are about that and perfectionism. So I think with his help in understanding that I was enough as I was, like, I don't think I grasped that, but he planted all the seeds. The seeds are all there in my journals that I still, it's the fundamental stuff that you need to navigate life regardless. And so having that one person, and he will say this, and I'll never forget the first time I sat down with him, he said, "I'm not here to tell you to leave, and I'm not here to tell you to stay. I'm here for you." And never hearing those words before, like that was it was so impactful that I still remember that. And so he gave me autonomy and he gave me agency when in a life where that wasn't allowed. And I've carried that with me. And so he was there for me, and so I think that having that one person believe in you really gave me, I couldn't do it, but I had somebody that I felt like I could show up weekly and that wanted to know how I was doing and to see me. And so I lived for him until I could start living for myself. And I knew that the only way that I could move forward was through becoming educated. I was very passionate about that. I still am passionate about that because I knew that that was the key. I somehow knew that if I could just become educated, that I would be able to understand the world and become somebody. What that looked like, I didn't know. I still don't know. I'm always joking about that. Like, who knows what that is, right? But that was the fuel. Like that was the carrot that kept me going. Having somebody show up for me weekly when I sat down for an hour and believe in me and my education. That was the thing that kept me going.
Yeah, it's so interesting how you worded that, living for them until I could live for me. And I think a lot of us had that, like how we were talking about why I left was thinking of the kids that aren't even born. Like I can endure this and I deserve this, but I can't watch someone else do it. It's like your self-worth is so low, yet you find some type of what would that word be? Just like hope in someone else to get you through it.
I think so. I don't even think, I mean, if you look at it from a perspective of self-worth, there is no self. Like these cults, they make you strip of any self. So you have no worth, truly, because you're told what your worth is as a woman is your performance and how you look and how you are for anything. So it's finding self. And so I think that when you're in these cults and you're looking for something, you have to find somebody to attach the seed onto because there is no self yet. And then through that establishment, then you start nurturing that and developing it and figuring out who you even are.
What an incredible group of women. Inspirational. Everyone's just going to be blown away in the comments. I can already hear it. We have such an amazing community that rallies around our guests, and I feel so fortunate to have that community. I think the last thing, just to wrap this up, if any of you have any thoughts or ideas, if someone is in a cult currently and is wanting to leave, wanting to stand up for themselves, if they can't leave, what are some things that they can do as a woman to stand up for themselves in small ways, to give themselves a little bit of power, or give themselves enough confidence and hope to try and escape? It's a big question. If anyone wants to jump in.
Yeah, can I just say, like, I have teared up and like tried to fight my tears so many times on this by hearing your guys's just amazing stories, and you guys have such a powerful energy that I feel so, I don't want to say blessed, that sounds so triggering, but that's the only word coming to mind right now. I feel blessed to be in, yes, there you go, fortunate to be in the presence with all of you. And I'm just grateful for this experience.
Cheers to that.
Thank you. On that topic that you were saying, Shalise, I do think that for anyone who is watching from the order or from any other cult, or someone who is questioning if they want to leave or what's the next steps or how to become aware of it, I think that a big thing is, if anyone is trying to tell you that you need to trust them over yourself, if you look up the definition of emotional abuse, that's what it is. It's when someone tries to make you distrust yourself or constantly tries to make you feel bad about yourself. So if anyone's ever trying to make you have less trust in yourself to gain more trust in them, run. That's all I have to say.
Yeah.
Great advice. I'll add, because there are some situations where it feels like it's impossible and there's absolutely no way. You just can't even wrap your mind around it. I will say that that the only thing that whoever's controlling you has no control over is your mind, and live in your mind the life that you want for yourself. Because I do somehow also believe that there is a force within us that can create that for us. And so I think the more you focus that, the more your own strength will kind of blossom and come out. And eventually you will know the path. It's like when those of us who are lucky enough to go to college, when you go to college and you're like, I don't know what I'm going to study. And then when I do figure it out, I don't know what kind of work I'm going to do. We can't figure it all out until we walk through the path, step by step, through the doors, one at a time. And that's the same for whatever situation you're in. If you are truly feeling ready to get out of it, is just trust the steps one by one, but definitely have the confidence and the trust that you can at least believe in whatever your thoughts are, and don't let anyone penetrate that or control that.
Yes.
I'd also add, there's so many resources out there now. There's so many, I'm sure all of us, I know a little bit culty.com/resources. There's so many books, including everyone's podcasts and websites and foundations and support systems and cheap therapy, free support groups. None of that a lot of that didn't even exist when I got out 7 years ago, and that's growing. And I think that the public perception about cults is changing largely thanks to all of these documentaries and podcasts and the Me Too movement. And it's changing. And I feel like if you feel like if anyone's listening and they think that they can't get out, find somebody in your group who did. And like we said before in this group, like reach out to them and have them guide you out and let them be the light. And then you'll be the light to others. I do believe that everybody can get out. I know there's some situations where you can't actually leave physically a community right now necessarily, but start to educate yourself the best you can.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you can't leave yet, sometimes this is because you're 12. You know,
Right.
sometimes this is because you're stuck. But I think when you can't leave oppression, right, it's survive and resist. And this little tiny tip I can give people is wear color and wear wacky outfits, whatever that means. But there's a reason that cults hate the color red. And Hitler and Hugh Hefner and probably your favorite patriarch hate red lipstick, right? Because like it makes us feel powerful. And even if it is, when I deployed as a woman in the military, it was bright, colorful underwear, right? Like even if it is color that nobody else can see, do it for you because it makes you feel like you are resisting, and it can be extremely important. Appearance control is always about behavior, and changing your appearance is the fastest way people control you. So you changing your appearance back can be extremely, extremely powerful.
I love that.
Yeah.
Obviously, it has to be done safely within the parameters that you can do at the time.
That's so good.
So I have two things. One thing, keep a journal and don't burn your shit when you leave. Keep it. It's history. It is evidence, and it can nail somebody to the wall. The amount of people that leave the church and they burn their clothes, they burn evidence, they burn all their journals, they burn everything that happened to them, that is erasing history. What we are doing, all of us women sitting here, are historical figures, right? We are carving out a new path. When I left, nobody existed like me out there. When I made my podcast, I was the first person to ever publicly go public with Amish and Mennonite stories. The amount of people that have burned their evidence and letters and all of these things that can convict people. Keep a journal, and you can never write too much. Be safe with it, but seriously, you'll go back 20 years after you leave and you'll be so grateful because the trauma completely hazes you for a really long time. So having that anchor there is really, really important. The other thing is that we overthink because we're so hypervigilant, and we're overthinking when we're in the church, right? And I see this with a lot of women that want to leave. They're trying to understand why. It's because if you're in your head, it's never been safe to be in your body, which we know as women in the communities, it's very difficult to be in your body. But slow it down, and where do you feel in your body? Whenever you feel about what you're experiencing and what is happening to you, you can slow your mind. And when you can slow your mind, you can actually make really qualified, good, healthy decisions because your intuition knows. No matter how many people have tried to brainwash you, you have that spark in you. And so listen to it, but you have to go in your body.
I've got some practical things. I really love Sarah's things about the tips and the amount of resources we have online because they're hidden. You don't have to have them lying around your house. Audiobooks, podcasts, memes. Like we didn't have social media therapists when I was getting out. But non-traceable money, gift cards, start stocking them. Do not take your children over state lines without an external witness or somebody facilitating it, so that you can avoid kidnapping charges. Nobody told me that one. I had a very, very helpful priest who helped keep us safe. And I just think trust that way leads to way. You don't have to have all of the answers right away. Right now, you have to get through today, and then tomorrow you'll get through tomorrow. And the energy that you have need for each step will come to you as you need it. And I too believe that anyone can get out. Like, there's a whole safety net out here. All of these survivor groups, if you contact someone online, can get you somebody. There's always somebody that will help you. There's underground networks. There's ways.
Amazing. Did everyone go who wanted to?
I'll add, but mostly echo. So number one, trust your intuition. If you're in, and I feel like I'm speaking to mothers who are still in the Hasidic community and who maybe will never be able to leave because they know the cost of living, of leaving, and what might happen, who they may lose. But just trust yourself. Like, if something feels wrong, if you're being asked to do something with your children, if there's a certain practice that feels really wrong to you and you don't want to do it, figure out a way. Trust yourself. And even though it may be hard, because if you've been for so long trusting others, it's okay if it's hard, but just that little glimmer, trust it. And then number two, the money thing, having somewhere where you have something stashed away, because if you have to leave quickly, money really helps. I wouldn't have survived without having gone to college and having a job before. So somehow figure out a way that you'll be able to have some resources.
Yeah.
And it's
Amazing.
doable. And then I just want to say, like, one inspirational thing, like, your children are so important. And as for somebody who grew up, yes, but know that as a woman and as a mother, if you are not in a place that's safe and that's emotionally or physically safe for you, you cannot be the mother that you could. Even you can be a role model for your children, even if you're not in the community, just by showing up powerfully. So don't be so afraid of losing everything, and sometimes be willing to take that risk, because it could pay off in ways you can never imagine.
Yes. Snaps for that. That sounds like our first Linda Listen.
That was fire. That was fire. And I want to just like kind of hug that statement with literally, do not pay attention to the people that say you are selfish and you are only thinking of yourself, because that's probably the biggest attack you will get when you make the decisions that you make for yourself. And it'll probably never go away. It'll be a perpetual and constant thing that will follow you the rest of your life, is that you are selfish. You only think of yourself. You've only done what you wanted to do. You didn't care how it affected and impacted others. Okay, maybe that's true, but
Yeah. Self-care is very important. Figuring out what you need, what your own mental health needs, all of that is so important. Put your mask on first. Everyone just gave incredible advice. If you have a Linda Listen, if anyone set one aside that you want to do, you can do that. Otherwise, I'm totally happy with all of that beautiful advice.
I totally thought that was where the Linda listens.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of ended up being. But if anyone's got something sassy, I'm
I
not
do
going to hold you
have
back.
one. I do have
Okay.
one.
Yeah. let's
Linda,
see.
listen, if you're considering joining a cult, if you want to join any of these groups or become a trad wife, or you are starting to explore these things, we have evidence and testimonies. We have survivor accounts. We have memoirs. We have documentaries. Please do your homework when you're considering practices that someone is telling you is holy or will make you closer to God or is going to bless your life richly. Your mileage might really vary. So we're here to help.
Yes.
I did not think I had a Linda Listen, but I'm going to piggyback off what you just said, Tia. I did not research before joining NXIVM. And as you said, I'm a convert. I joined a cult. I wasn't born into it. And I trusted the person who invited me implicitly. People now are joining these things because they look good on the outside. I am a community junkie. I love groups. I love this. I love this whole vibe. If this was a cult, I would join it because I want to feel connected to people and feel accepted and feel loved and feel special, all these normal things. There's so many things out there right now that are a little bit culty and a whole lot culty, from trad wives to Orange Theory and all sorts of things in between. Doing your research, like Tia just said, means typing in, is blank a cult? Where there is smoke, there is fire. Do not ask the organization you are thinking of joining if they are a cult. Do not go to the leadership. Do not go to the pastor. Do not go to your counselor. Do not go to the leader. Go into the Reddit and go into the internet and do your due diligence, because they will deny. And if you do ask them and they say, oh, that woman's crazy or that's a woman's scorned, blah, 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 run. Organizations that do not take responsibility for the allegations against them, huge red flag. That's my Linda Listen.
I'm gonna piggyback on her piggyback. So now we're like a triple piggyback. But like
Oh my God.
now I'm not, because I just lost what I was gonna. Oh no. Okay.
Oh, no.
What I was gonna say was, just even if you're just asking the question, is it a cult? There's something there. There's something there, right?
Yeah.
Like, I've never been asked the question in good faith, is it a cult? And found nothing concerning. Because when we have good community experiences, we don't wonder if we're being manipulated and controlled. So listen to yourself if you're asking that question.
I'm not going to piggyback on anyone's piggyback that piggybacked, but I do want to say one last little thing, and this one really is to women, because my whole mission is to help women, especially and primarily. We know that these cults and these religions and these practices and these ideologies are here to silence women and to censor women. But the worst of it all, the most damaging thing of it all, is auto censorship, because we women do that to ourselves all the time. We doubt ourselves, we question ourselves. And so let's break free from that as women. Let's really first unsilence and uncensor ourselves. And whatever is being done to us is, it's out there. We need to let go of that control. But what we do to ourselves and to each other as women is probably the first thing that needs to go.
Yeah, I agree. And with that, everybody here, guys listening, everybody here is not censoring themselves. They are speaking out. They either have books, memoirs, podcasts, YouTube channels, websites, resources, everything that you need. It is just, you won't have time to go through all of the juicy stuff that they have. Please check out everyone's books and podcasts and YouTube channels in the description. Go listen to all of them, buy it, do what you got to do. Thank you guys so much for being here and for spending 2 hours with me for our 200th episode. This has been incredible. I feel honored that you all accepted the invitation, and I'm so honored to know all of you just as humans. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Please, thanks everyone.
What a
Yes.
gift.
Thank you so much to everybody listening. Thank you for making it all the way to the end. We love it. We love your comments. We love your support. Our community is incredible. You really do raise up our guests in such a beautiful way. The comments we receive from our guests about how they feel loved and supported really is a testament to you guys. We appreciate you. If you want to support the podcast, the best way is to interact with this post, share it, like it, leave a comment, even if it's an emoji. If you want to support even further, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/cults2consciousness. We do have some merch at cults2consciousness.com under the merch tab. We are going to Mexico in October of this year. It's weird to say this year now that it's January. And all of you on the call are welcome to come. That would be amazing. We're doing a Cults to Consciousness trip. We went to Costa Rica and it was incredible. We are going to Mexico next, a beachy trip. We would love to see you there. We just launched it. All of that is going to be in the description as well. You can check out the itinerary. First date people get a discount. And I think that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to also watch every single person's interview that is here. We've done multiple episodes with them. We'll link all of those as well. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.